વાણી મેલ મારા રમવા માડી ઊભી જાણ ભેડિયા વારી મારા રમવા માડી ઊભી જાણ ભેડિયા વારી કચ્છના ડુંગરા કાળા ઊભા જાણ કાન રૂપાળા ડુંગરા પાસે ચાંદ દેખાણો દ્રશ્ય કેવો દર્શાય ડુંગરા પાસે ચાંદ દેખાણો દ્રશ્ય કેવો દર્શાય એ ગોરી રાધા કાળા કાનને કાને ગોરી રાધા કાળા કાનને કાને વાતડી કેવા જાય.
Hello, good evening everyone. We will start in 5 minutes. Thank you for waiting and please be patient. I'm sorry about the little confusion that was there during the registration link and the announcement. We are starting at 5, but give us some 5 minutes and we'll be starting shortly.
જાય વાદળીઓ વાર વિખાણા સુંદર કેવા રૂપ સર્જાણા વાદળીઓ વાર વિખાણા સુંદર કેવા રૂપ સર્જાણા એક કચ્છના ડુંગરા કાળા ઊભા જાણે કાન રૂપાળા વેતી નદી તટ વડ વડાયે ને વડ ઊભો વિકસેલ વેતી નદી તટ વડ વડાયે રે વડ ઊભો વિકસેલ એ જોગી ઊભો જલ ઝીલ તો જાણે જોગી ઊભો જલ ઝીલ તો જાણે મોકળી જટા મેલ સાધુ જાણે મંત્રો સાધે જોગી બાવો ઈશ યારા દે સાધુ જાણે મંત્રો સાધે જોગી બાવો ઈશ યારા દે કચ્છના ડુંગરા કાળા ઊભા જાણે કાન રૂપાળા ડુંગરા ઉપર આત્મ્યો દિવસ ઓપતો કેવો યાલ ડુંગરા ઉપર આત્મ્યો દિવસ ઓપતો કેવો યાલ એ ઓડી પીતાંબર કાનજી ઉભો ઓડી પીતાંબર કાનજી ઉભો નખરાડો નંદલાલ જાણે ભરી बारी रंगनी जोड़ी हरिवार खेल तोड़ी जाने बारी रंगनी जोड़ी हरिवार खेल तोड़ी कच्छना डूंगरा काड़ा उबा जाने कान रूपाड़ा.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 5th episode of the webinar series of community conserved areas in South Asia. And this is being organized by the ICCA South Asia Regional Coordination Committee. And after a brief short break, we are back, and it's a very exciting talk, which is on the culture and conservation in the Dibang Valley of Arunachal Pradesh. And before we head on to the actual conversation and with the speakers, I would just like to start with a few guidelines. So, just uh, so if you have any questions, there is a Q&A box at the bottom. We will take all your questions towards the end of the session, and we will make sure most of your questions are answered, and hopefully we'll cover most of it. This session is being recorded and also being broadcasted live on YouTube. So in case you have friends and people who are going to be joining in and are unable to do so, the entire Zoom our capacity is restricted to 100 attendees. So anyone up beyond that will can watch it on YouTube live right away, and we'll be sending you the links in your chat box, and you can start sending it to people. For any queries and suggestions to subscribe to the ICCA South Asia e-list, you can write to iccasouthasiagmail.com. So without much further ado, I would like to bring Nima Pathak, who is going to give us a short introduction on what CCAs and ICCA Consortium is. Nima, over to you.
Thank you, Shruti. I'll just share my screen quickly. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome everyone all over again. My apologies to those who have attended these webinars before and have probably heard the context multiple times, but please bear with us for the sake of those who may not have heard the context before. I think today's conversation is extremely relevant for a lot of national and international conservation debates that are going on currently, particularly those related to the conservation of large threatened species like tigers. And we are so happy that our team from Arunachal is able to make it despite a lot of hurdles. They have power failures, so we are extremely grateful to them for having taken this time out. Just to give a context, I think many of you probably have been part of or listening to or reading about the debates that are happening internationally about the current conservation goals, particularly those related to post-2020 global biodiversity framework of the CBD. Because it's very relevant right now because it talks about bringing 30% of the world's surface under protected areas by 2030. And this is as against the previous target, which was Aichi target, which talked about bringing about 17% of the world's surface under protected areas by 2020, which of course has not been met as yet. You may also be familiar that about 128 experts and organizations working on environmental justice issues have written to the UN expressing their concern about this, and they have said that over 300 million people are likely to be impacted by this decision or this process. So it's also important for us to understand where is their concern coming from. And if we look at the South Asian context, particularly taking the example of India, we have 870 protected areas covering just about 5% of our geographical area, which include national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and tiger reserves. And most of them are under the government control. And our current policies do not recognize the use and management rights of the millions of people critically dependent on these areas, either for their economic needs, ecological needs, cultural needs, or any other interface. And many of these protected areas have been created using extremely violent methods, often in violation of human rights, under restriction of local people's rights and access to these resources. If we just take the example of tiger, because it's going to be a major focus of our conversation today, we have about 50 tiger reserves in our country, and the core of these tiger reserves has over 2,800 villages. Of these, 14,000 families have already been relocated with this belief that humans and tigers cannot coexist. And if we want to create spaces for survival of tiger, we necessarily need inviolate zones, which means relocation of people. And about over 42,000 families are currently being relocated, and most of this in violation of many laws of the land and also human rights violations. A very small sample that we took of 26 out of these 800 protected areas, which indicated that between 1999 and 2019, already 13,000 families have been relocated from these protected areas. So you can imagine what could be happening in 800 protected areas. Some of these conflicts we have recently documented in a map that is collectively put together by Environmental Justice Atlas and Kalpavriksh, and I would really encourage all of you to please do take a look at this map, because it becomes context that we're talking about. So if we globally look at, if we are talking about so much violation, so many restrictions of rights of people, so much trauma being caused, what is this protected area network actually achieving? So if we look at some of the reports, there's a report, a UNEP 2012 report which talks about the fact that even though protected area coverage has gone up, biodiversity at all levels has actually declined, and many critically important areas for endangered species are actually outside the protected areas. So this is what brings us, if we compare it with what the World Bank report talks about, that there is about 20% area which is under the traditional indigenous peoples' territories, under their management and governance, which actually contains about 80% of the planet's biodiversity. A very recent report conducted by Intergovernmental Panel on Ecosystem Services and Biodiversity also says that although the biodiversity decline is across all ecosystems, this decline is less in this 20% area. So now if we are talking about 30% of the world global surface being coming under protected areas, if we continue to follow the model that we have been following till now, we can imagine why these experts are raising this concern that there'll be more than 300 million people severely impacted. And it is also likely that much of this protected area will be from this 20% that we are talking about, which is still under the control of traditional indigenous peoples' territories, and much more which is under the control of other local communities, which is not reflected in this. So this is what brings us to the context of today's conversation, which is ICCA's Territories of Life, or what are also referred to as community conserved areas in South Asia, which are essentially territories and areas governed, managed, conserved by indigenous people and local communities. And the reason we are talking about these is because we do believe that if indeed 30% of the area needs to come under biodiversity conservation and needs to be left for wildlife, but it cannot be done by following the model that we have been doing till now. It can only be done through recognition and support to what we call ICCAs. So these ICCAs are now also recognized in most international conservation conventions and treaties, including Convention on Biological Diversity and large international organizations like IUCN. So ICCAs have three main defining characters: that most ICCAs would have a deep, strong bond between a community and its territory, which could be mountain, forest, freshwater, coastal, any ecosystem. The community has a de facto capacity to take decisions and enforce rules in that territory. Decisions and rules are leading to conservation outcomes and invariably also lead to livelihoods and well-being of local communities, ensuring livelihoods and well-being of local communities. These areas, the local people's rights may not be legally recognized in these territories and areas, and which is definitely true for South Asia, as we just saw. So considering this, the CCAs face enormous amount of challenge all across the globe and in South Asian region and in India, mainly because of unclear and unrecognized legal status and tenure. also because of lack of information about them and a complete invisibility and recognition of their significance for conservation of biocultural diversity, tremendous threat that they face because of development projects like mines, dam, infrastructure projects. And while defending their territories and lands from these projects, from these development projects or other external threats, the threats that they face to their lives and their property. In addition to that, in addition to a number of other challenges, they also face challenges because of changing socioeconomic situations, local aspirations, and inadequate livelihood options in many of these areas. It's in order to address some of these issues and in order to also bring about greater recognition to ICCAs with a belief and conviction that this is indeed the way to go ahead for biodiversity conservation in future. A few organizations, individuals, experts, and members of indigenous and local communities came together in 2010 and formed a global consortium called ICCA Consortium, which has since been fairly effective in trying to bring about a recognition to ICCAs in international debates, conversations, not so in many of the countries like us. So ICCA has a mission to promote appropriate recognition and support to ICCAs. It's a member-based organization with many NGOs, indigenous communities, federations, and communities themselves being members. In addition to that, also has many researchers, scientists, individuals who can join the consortium as honorary members who really believe that they want to support this movement. In 2019, the members who were associated with ICCA Consortium and based in South Asia came together to form a regional consortium. And this webinar series actually is a collective effort of this regional coordination group. If this series of webinar, we hope to cover CCAs from India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Maldives, and covering all kinds of ecosystem in South Asian region. And the idea is to be able to create a dialogue about a dialogue, a debate, and get recognition for an alternative way of achieving ecological and human well-being. If any of you would like to join us in this effort and would like to join ICCA Consortium or the South Asia group, you are welcome to write to us at iccasouthasia@gmail.com. In case you have suggestions for you know of ICCAs who you think should be part of this group, please do send us ideas for that. And we do hope in the coming months that we will keep this debate and this visibility to ICCAs available. I would not take any further time. Thank you very much, and hand over to Shruti.
Thank you, Nima. That was really interesting. Once again, I would really like to thank Sahil, Jibi, Iho, and Achili for taking some time out and talking to us, because there was no electricity the entire day, and we've managed to come here and share such fascinating stories with us. So quick intro about all of them, interesting facts. So Sahil is an anthropologist and he has been researching on the relationship between Idu culture and the natural world and Idu shamanism for the past 8 years. Jibi Pulu is an Idu Mishmi elder who runs a small ecotourism initiative and have been working with conservationists and scientists for many, many, many years. Iho Mitapo has worked with Sahil during his PhD. Iho created a local ecotourism venture called Dibang Ventures with the youth in Dibang Valley. He now splits his time between the venture and initiating culture and wildlife conservation programs in the valley. Achali Mihu is from Anini, which is in the upper mountains of Dibang Valley, and has also worked with Sahil in his PhD, has a ME in sociology, and currently works as a community health mobilizer. She hopes to pursue a master's in culture and nature conservation someday, and has worked on preservation of Idu culture in her community. So thank you, Sahil. Thank you, Jibi. Thank you, Iho. Thank you, Achili. So maybe we can start with Nima coming in, and we can start this conversation.
Yes, are Sahil and GB, okay. So glad to have you all here. Thank you so much. As I said, despite all the constraints, we're so happy to have you here today, all of you. I was wondering, since you also have limitation of time, your battery may run out, as you were saying. I was just wondering if GB and Achille, you would like to quickly tell us about your community, the Idu Mishmi, and your territory, the Dibang Valley.
Hi, everybody. Nima, can I share the screen now?
Yes, please do.
Okay. One quick second.
Do you want to just quickly introduce yourselves? Because
yeah,
just so people know who's who.
So I'm Sahil, and Shruti gave a very appropriate introduction of me. This is GB Pulu. This is Iho Mitapo here, and Achille Mihu is all the way in the corner. But as before we begin, before I hand it over to Nava GB to speak about Dibang Valley and Idu Mishmi, on the screen you can see what we're doing right now. There's no power here, there hasn't been, so you can see a cord extended from the window of the house into the car. And that's how we're able to connect the computer. I thought we'll just start off with that. But over to Nava GB now.
So we are Idu Mishmis, all of who are sitting here. Like, so I talk about Idu Mishmis. We are our area is somewhere in the northeastern region, and in state of Arunachal Pradesh, and Idu Mishmi resides in Dibang Valley, which is upper and lower, and some part also in Siang and Lohit. So the total area we have under Idu Mishmi area is near about 14,000 square kilometers, and out of that, some areas are, if you divide our landscape, some areas are divided into wildlife sanctuary. That's upper part is called Dibang Wildlife Sanctuary. In the lower part, in lower Dibang Valley, we have a Mehal Wildlife Sanctuary. And Dibang Wildlife Sanctuary is the biggest in India. It's 4,129 square kilometers. And the Mehal Wildlife Sanctuary is 264 square kilometers. Apart from that, that's what we have a land, our landscape. And traditionally, we call our land as land of 12 rivers, Chitu Huluni. And when you count the river, there are near about 12 valleys and rivers in this. So we have been inhabiting in this area for centuries. So according to the stories, we all came from Greater Inner Mongolia, came all the way to China, and some of our clans, they started coming down from Burma toward this valley, and some of them, they landed from the Tibet region to this place. This is how our 12 valleys were settled, maybe near about 1,000 years before. So when you see this valley, in each of these valleys, each clan has its own claim. Okay, there is no independent land, no land which is not occupied. So each clan, each family has its own holding in these valleys. So this is slowly, when we see that it's such a beautiful landscape, some of this landscape are now given away to the sanctuaries, some are being given away to the projects, some are being given away to parks, probably. This is how it's going to constrain our land. Slowly our land holding, individual holding and community holding is being constrained. So when you talk about the culture, our relationship with the forest is purely that culture that has helped us to conserve this forest. And if the forest is conserved here, it's because of that, and the less population in this area. But in the name of, if you bring more people in this forest, it will have constraint. It will have imbalance in the impact of the ecology. That's what I feel. Maybe here on, Sahil can carry on the story, what he has seen in this valley.
Thank you, Nama.
Yeah, thank you. That's amazing. Thank you, GB. Sahil, we heard about this beautiful territory. So how did you hear about it? What brought you here? And what kind of research have you been doing? Could you please explain a little bit to us?
Sure. I've been in Dibang Valley now for more than 8 years. I initially came to Dibang Valley in 2011 towards the end of the year, and that's when I met Navajivi, and since then we've been together. What brought me here, I was sent here because there were reports of tigers in Dibang Valley. So I was sent to find out more about them, but I was only told that the tigers were here in the low-lying areas, in the foothills, close to wildlife sanctuaries. But when I got here, actually, I heard stories of tigers living high up in the mountains, tigers living everywhere on the high mountains and the river valleys. And I didn't understand. And this was around 2010, 2011. We had just had a news that two of the most high-profile tiger reserves in India, Panna and Sariska, had entirely lost their tigers. They had been poached out. And here I was in Dibang Valley, hearing stories of tigers from everyone, seeing tiger signs that you see on the screen in an area that was not a tiger reserve, where there was no formal conservation initiatives. So the question that I asked at that time was, why were these tigers here? And right in front of me lay 14,000 square kilometers of mountains covered in forest, grassland, and snow. And what was it that was conserving everything? So that's the question that I asked, and that became the question for my PhD, and that's what I explored by living in Dibang Valley over the past many years. So to give you a glimpse of what Dibang Valley looks like, when you drive towards Dibang Valley from Assam, you are welcomed by lush green mountains that are covered in tropical and subtropical rainforest. As you drive into the valley, and so Dibang Valley gets its name after River Dibang, which is a tributary of Brahmaputra. And you drive along the river into the valley opens up, it's shrouded in mist and clouds throughout most of the year, and you get grasslands and different kinds of forests. As you drive towards the Tibetan border, it opens up even more. There's pine interspersed with cedar and maple and other kinds of temperate forest and trees. Towards the border, the landscape changes again, and the snows very heavily in the winter. As you go up the mountain, you have in front of you hundreds of high elevation lakes that lay locked up, frozen in ice and snow for most part of the year. But in summer and monsoon, the snow melts and the lake's water flows into the rivers, and that's what powers the mighty Dibang River. And so this is the landscape that it's a stunning landscape. So I had two aims. I first wanted to find out, how many animals were here, what kind of animals were here. And then the second question was why they were there. So to find out more about animals, I teamed up with Iho, who will speak in a little bit, and Achali here and Navajivi. The four of us together would go into the forest, work with different villagers here, and we placed hundreds of camera traps all across the Dibang Valley. The forest is so dense that you don't see animals with your naked eyes, and so camera traps became our eyes in the forest. And these camera traps, we carpeted the mountains with these camera traps, and when the data started coming in, it opened up the window to a world that was incredibly dense and populated with animals and spirits and people. And let me show you some pictures that we got. So obviously the animal that initially aroused my curiosity was the tiger, and we got lots and lots of pictures of tigers spread out throughout the valley. We also got lots of pictures of the clouded leopard that you see on the screen in front of you. We got this very curious looking animal, the Asiatic Golden Cat. The Dibang Valley is so unique. The power is back. Now you can see our faces. So back to the Asiatic Golden Cat. It's supposed to be golden in color, but in the Dibang Valley, this unique cat takes on many different colors. It's golden, it's in gray, it's also this jet black color, which is also the Asiatic Golden Cat. Then we have the cinnamon, which is the first record of this cat in India. And we also have this unique form of golden cat, which has spots like that of a leopard. Again, the first record of such in India. And this very unique form, which is the first record of this type of cat in the world, also lives in Dibang Valley. So it's, like I said, it's very densely full of these amazing creatures. Then you have this, in the higher elevation, this unique animal, which gets its name after the Mishmi community. It's called the Mishmitakin. And these are what we call the nomads of the high mountains. They're like the wildebeest in Africa. They undertake huge migrations. In the summer, they go up all to the valleys, to the high altitudes, the pictures that I showed you. And in the winter, as they are covered in a carpet of snow, they come down into the forest, and that's where they reproduce. So you see little takin babies running around in front of the screen. We also have red pandas there, and stunningly beautiful birds, galliforms, pheasants, the Temminck's tragopan, and the Himalayan monad. So it's really is a unique ecosystem where you have all of these unusual animals occupying the same area. And not to forget, this area is the homeland of the Idu Mishmi people. So after we gathered all this information, the question that came, it's densely populated with all these animals. Why were they there? And that's when we began this process in which I lived in the Idu community for a number of years. And with the help of Achuli and Iho and Naba and the members of the community, learned the Idu language and started to understand how Idu people lived with the forest and what these animals in the forest meant to them. And what we found through this long-term research is that that there's a complex sort of interaction that Idu people have with the forest. And in front of you, you see this map, this sort of clock, which shows that what the different kinds of activities that Idu people engage in different months. So in the center, you've got the months. In the green, you've got different activities that happen in the field. There's rice that is sown, then the corn is sown, then there's different kinds of activities that happen. And in the red are the activities that happen in the same months in the forest. There's different kinds of hunting and trapping and fishing and frogging activities. And on the very top are how the climate changes up in the sky. So all these three elements, the human, the village, the fields, the forest, and what happens in the atmosphere, the climate, they're all interconnected. They signal one another. They're all blend in to create this life where everything is mixed in. And as a result of this life and the rules that people have to follow here, what we found is that, these restrictions that Achuli will talk about in a bit, the taboos, we found that they were reducing people's reliance on wildlife, on consumption, on hunting by 88%. And it's this system that had kept this incredible biodiversity and some of the most endangered animals preserved in Dibang Valley. I'm going to stop here and I'll let Nima ask us more questions.
Thanks. That was amazing to look at all those animals. And one is curious to know about all of them. But since the popular imagination is always caught by the tiger, so I'm also curious, the question that you asked earlier, if one of you could share, what is this relationship? Why are there so many tigers, as Sahil was talking about?
Okay, hello. तो मैं सबसे पहले शुरू एक अपना जो कल्चर में जो वो होता है उससे शुरू करता हूँ। हम यही मानते, हमारा जो दादा दादी है, हमारा जो पूर्वज लोग है, वो सब से हम लोग यही सीखा है। और हमारा जो ग्रैंड दादा दादी लोग थे, वो लोग से हम लोग यही सीखता आया है कि हमारा जो टाइगर है वो हमारा भाई होता था, किसी जमाने में वो हमारा भाई होता था। तो उसके बाद हम लोग टाइगर और जो हम इंसान है, जो हम ईदू है, वो एक ही माँ का पेट से जन्मे थे। तो हम लोग एक समय जब हम लोग टाइगर और हम ईदू मिश्मी जो भाई था, वो हम लोग जंगल में हंटिंग के लिए गए थे। और तो ये जो टाइगर होता था वो बहुत अच्छा हंटर होता था, और वो जो हमारा इंसान है वो तो फिर जो ईदू है जो इंसान ही है। तो दोनों हंटिंग के लिए गए और फिर एक जानवर मारा। उसके बाद टाइगर जो है उसको कच्चा कच्चा ही खा जाता था, जबकि हमारा जो इंसान था उसको पकाकर खाना चाहता था। तो इसी तरह से तो फिर भाई ने सोचा कि ये जो टाइगर था ये बोलता था कि हमें जो पका हुआ खाना है वो पसंद नहीं है, और जो कच्चा खून है वही खाना चाहता है। तो फिर जो ईदू है, जो भाई है, वो सोचा कि ये तो अगर ऐसा ही होता रहा तो ये हमारा माँ पिताजी को भी खा जाएगा। इस तरह का उसको ख्याल आया। उसके बाद भाई ने सोचा कि नहीं, अभी इसको हम मार देंगे। तो इसी से जो है हमारा जो ईदू भाई था उसने जो ये टाइगर को मार दिया। और तब जो हमारा क्रीचर है, जो हमारा ईदू का जो मासेलो जिनू है, जिसको हम लोग एक स्पिरिट है जिसको हम लोग मानते हैं, तो उसने फिर एक रिस्ट्रिक्शन लगाया। अभी से टाइगर जो है, टाइगर और इंसान साथ में नहीं रहेगा, टाइगर जंगल में रहेगा और इंसान अपने घर में रहेगा। तब से दोनों सेपरेट हो गए। और उसके बाद फिर बहुत सारा रिस्ट्रिक्शन लगाया, जैसे आप अगर आप टाइगर को मारेगा तो आपको बहुत खराब कर्ज मिलेगा, बहुत खराब कर्ज मिलेगा, जो आपका ग्रैंडसन तक जाएगा। वो कर्ज जो है कभी नहीं मिटेगा। इस तरह का कर्ज जो हमारा क्रिएचर है उसने लगाया। तो तभी से जो है हम लोग यही बिलीव करते हैं कि हम लोग टाइगर को कभी नहीं मार सकते, वो हमारा भाई है। और अगर कभी दिन हम एक्सीडेंटली मारते हैं, जैसे अपना सेल्फ डिफेंस में भी कोई मारता है, तो आपको उसको जैसा हमारा कोई अगर हमारा भाई मरता है, इस तरह का स्पिरिचुअल हमें फ्यूनरल जो है हमें करना पड़ता है। जैसे कि आपको 5 दिन तक आपको ईगू जो हमारा शैमन है उसके साथ वो जो है आके चांटिंग करता रहता है, और बहुत सारा रिस्ट्रिक्शन जो है वो हमें फॉलो करने पड़ते हैं। तो इसीलिए जो है हमारा जो यहाँ पे टाइगर का डेंसिटी है, जो अभी तक जो हमारा वो कल्चर का वजह से ही बचा हुआ है। और हम अभी तक भी यही मानते हैं कि हमें जो है अपना वो टाइगर को नहीं मारना चाहिए, और हम अपना जो छोटा जनरेशन है उन सबको भी हम यही बताते हैं। तो बताने का वजह ये भी है क्योंकि हमने अपने ही जो हमारे ही टाइम में हमने देखा है कि इसका जैसे कि किसी ने टाइगर को मार दे तो इसका कर्ज जो है बहुत खराब होता है। ये हमने अपने आंखों से देखा हुआ है, जो ये कर्ज जो है होता है। तो इसलिए हम अभी तक भी बिलीव करते हैं, और हम यही बताते हैं अपना जो भाई लोग हैं उन सबको भी हम लोग ये बताते हैं कि आप टाइगर को नहीं मार सकते। सिर्फ टाइगर को बोल के नहीं है, मतलब जितना भी कैट फैमिली का जो जंगल में रहता है, तब उन सबको मारने से हमारा जो ये रिस्ट्रिक्शन है वो सब फॉलो करने पड़ते हैं।
Can I jump in really quickly?
Yes, thank you so much. I was just going to ask whether you would like to add something to this.
So Iho narrated the story, this tale of the Tiger Brotherhood very, just very eloquently. And this is a story that, most Idus know. And when I would begin asking about tigers, this is the story that people would tell me. So it's a story that's been internalized over the generations. But I do want to clarify one thing, that it's very important that we don't romanticize and simplify the way people live with the tiger. It's not easy to live with a massive 250 kilogram predator in your backyard. It's not easy at all. And so, and Idus people don't, it's the tiger for them is not like a dog where they get warm and fuzzy feelings about it. The perception of a tiger is that of a fear. You're afraid of the spiritual and the physical power of that animal. And also because of those spiritual and physical power, there is this respect towards it. Tigers prey on domestic animals here, that are very important for the Idu people, both for livelihood and for ceremonial purposes. There are negotiations you have to have every day. You go into the forest, there's the tiger there, so you have to be careful. So it's not exactly very easy. And there's no tiger, the concept of tiger worship doesn't exist. It's a relationship of power and equality, where tiger is considered to be more powerful than the people. And when you are working with or living around someone that is more powerful than you, then you have to carefully negotiate how you live with it. So just trying to complicate the idea, the very simplistic idea of what people may understand about human-tiger coexistence here. It's difficult to live with tigers, yet tigers are here because that's how the world is. That's how the world was created for the Idu people. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you, Sahil. In fact, that was my very next question to Iho or Achille. Just wanting to know, how does it feel? Because the normal belief is, as I was explaining also in the context, that humans and tigers, particularly large, ferocious animals, cannot coexist. And hence the model that we have to move people out of any tiger reserve or any space that is created for tigers. But you all live with tigers, and not just tigers, but we saw a plethora of other animals that Sahil showed us earlier on. So what do people feel with this? How do they coexist? I mean, we just heard Sahil talk about this fear, but in addition to that, what kind of other feelings do people have? I mean, what does this fear lead to? Also, if you could just explain this whole coexistence, do you think that with this fear, with these cultural practices, how does this coexistence work?
Well, to start with, we live in a plain areas, which is just below the mountains. So some years before, there are a lot of wildlife, a lot of tigers among us. So we don't see them now. It's only in the deeper forest. Now, occasionally it happens that even in 2 days, sometimes the elephant, tiger comes and prey the mithun. No? The mithun is a cattle, kind of a cattle, or we keep that in the forest. It's a semi-domesticated one. So we keep that in around the villages, the forest around the villages. So the tigers come to prey that sometimes, and there often many conflicts happen because of that, and sometimes the tigers get killed incidentally due to that also. So, but let me tell you some stories which happened in my life and when I was very young, and what is it to be like seeing a tiger or living with a tiger. Those years I was too young. Maybe I didn't even go to the school. No, at the time I was too young. I was staying with my mother, and my father and my brother used to go down to the fields that was quite below the riverine place. So one night, around my father and brother, they had gone to the fields to stay there for long period. So me and my mother was there, and my younger sister was there. Incidentally, my younger sister is no more. So 3 of us were in the house, and it was in a village called Elopa. So up in the mountain near about 40 kilometers from Roing, my hometown now. So that must have been the year something like 1976 around. So at that time, the forest was very rich, even the tigers, everything was there. So one night when we were sleeping, all of a sudden there was a lot of roaring, squealing of the pig. Pigs started squealing so much below the house. In our traditional houses, we have a still house. We keep the pigs in below the houses, in a stilted house. So this usually the pigs used to be below the house. So that very night, all of a sudden the pigs started squealing so much. So I also woke up, and in the meantime, my mother woke up earlier, and she picked up a jerrycan, the oil jerrycan, and she bent that drum and just slowly threw away to the window, towards the window. It seems the tiger had picked up the pig and was climbing the fence, but the jerrycan hit that tiger somewhere, and it dropped the pig back and was below the fence again. And that happened that night like that. And early morning when we got up, we see that the pig was badly injured, and after a few hours that pig died. So this is how the scenario was some years before. But now all of a sudden, as we start moving in around the villages, and more deforestation happened, and more people moved in, there is no tigers in plain areas usually. So whatever the cameras we have captured are in the mountains. The tigers are in the mountains, still in the mountains. So this is how we live with the tigers, with the forest. But eventually this connection with the forest is losing. So this is how we lived. And I don't know why. It wasn't a thrill, it was a fear, but we have lived like that. Our childhood, we have grown with that. So that's what I can tell you my story, basically.
Iho also has a really interesting story about elephants.
तो मैं भी मेरा अपना बचपन का ही कहानी बताना चाहूंगा। बचपन में हम जब छोटा छोटा हुआ करता था, तो हम मेरा माँ पिताजी और हमारा जितना भी गांव के लोग हैं, वो एक जगह पे खेती के लिए जाते थे। वो हमारा गांव से करीबन 9-10 किलोमीटर दूर है। तो वो जगह का नाम नातीपू है। वहां पे बहुत खेत हो करता था। वो जो है बहुत फर्टाइल था वहां का जमीन, जहाँ पे हम अदरक उगाते थे और सरसों चावल वगैरह उगाते थे। तो उसी तरह से हमेशा खेत होता था, और हमारा माँ पिताजी लोग हमेशा वहां पे डर के रहते थे, क्योंकि उस जगह में बहुत सारा एलिफेंट आया करता था। जितना भी वाइल्ड एलिफेंट है, वो उसका बहुत बड़ा बड़ा झुंड आता था। तो हमेशा हमारा जो गांव में खेत में हम लोग रहने के लिए एक घर बनाते, पूरा पेड़ के ऊपर में ट्री हाउस बनाते थे, जहाँ पे एलिफेंट नहीं पहुंच सकेगा। ऐसा जगह पे हम घर बनाते थे। और फिर धीरे धीरे करके वहां पे बहुत सारा खेत हुआ करता था। तो धीरे धीरे करके सबने धीरे धीरे करके वो जगह को छोड़ना शुरू कर दिया। वहां पे कभी भी हम फसल उगाते थे, जैसे पंपकिन वगैरह उगाते थे, तो एलिफेंट आकर हमारा जितना बहुत मेहनत करके रखा हुआ जो खेत होता था, वहां पे पूरा एक ही दिन में पूरा खेत को खत्म कर देता था। तो इसी तरह से फिर लोगों ने बहुत परेशान होकर के वो जगह को सीधा छोड़ दिया। तो अभी जो है वहां पे बहुत सारे एलिफेंट, कोई तो शायद परमानेंटली वहां पे रहते हैं, और अभी रिसेंटली जो है वहां पे फिर से खेती करना शुरू किया है। जो मेरा ये स्टोरी का जस्ट बताने का यही मतलब था कि यहाँ पे एलिफेंट से जो है, जानवर से जो परेशान होकर के लोगों ने जो है कुछ कुछ जमीन को छोड़ दिया था एक समय में। तो यही बताना चाहता था।
And I think just to add to that, like Nima said, that typically what has happened is people are moved out of animal areas to create inviolate spaces for animals. And Iho's story tells us that actually people had to leave, that voluntarily give their land to animals here. And then Naba's story was about how, living around dangerous animals like the tiger is a daily dance. But the important point of all of this is that all of these negotiations are happening on a daily basis, and the animals are still here and the people are still here. And coexistence is not easy, but this is what it is. Coexistence is problematic. It's difficult. It's a daily practice of you give something and I give something. And it continues to happen in Dibang Valley till this day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is very interesting. But what also then brings to my mind is that from what I understand, these are cultural practices and this everyday negotiations that keep the relationship between people and wildlife, and which has kept also the population of wildlife in this area. And people have still existed with the fear, with the interface, leaving spaces sometimes themselves and sometimes animals leaving the spaces for humans. So my question then is that, from what little I know, that there are no institutions or systems that may have been created in recent times to maintain this ICCA in this region, right? Like in many other ICCAs, we talk about rules and regulations and institutions that have been created. Here we're talking about a system which is evolving, continuous, vibrant, but without any institutional structure necessarily. So how do you see the future, like this day-to-day struggle, day-to-day negotiation? Would it continue in future? How do you see the future of wildlife and the relationship between people and biodiversity in this area?
Nima, before we go to the future, can we talk a little bit about these nature-based practices that are not formal institutions but have allowed animals to exist?
Surely. Wonderful.
Okay. Actually, we'll talk about that.
Hi.
Hi.
So here CCA is not exist here, but luckily we have culture that is protecting the biodiversity, nature since ages. And here I would like to mention some points. पहला ये कि हमारे यहाँ पे जितने भी जो बिग वाइल्ड एनिमल्स होते हैं उसको हंटिंग करने से पहले, कंज्यूम खाने से पहले हम लोगों को चेन्स ऑफ रेस्ट्रिक्शंस फॉलो करना पड़ता है, विच इज ईयूएना इन ईदू एंड टेबूस। उसको टेबूस मतलब ईयूएना कहते हैं हम लोग टेबूस को। और उसमें से बिग एनिमल में से मैं एक एग्जाम्पल के तौर पे एक पर्टिकुलर स्पीशीज को लेकर के बताना चाहूँगी, विच इज़ मस्किटियर, जो कि हमारे ईदू में विच इज़ बिलीव वेरी हाईली वैल्यूएबल, जिसको उस जमाने में लोग उसके हंटिंग करते थे और दे यूज टू सेल दैट मास्क पॉट कहते हैं उसे, उसको सेल करके दे रन देयर लाइवलीहुड। तो उसके वजह से जो मैन होते थे हमारी कम्युनिटी के, वो लोग जंगल पे जाते थे फॉर अ मंथ, महीने तक जंगल में रहते थे। और इसके बाद जाने से पहले, बिफोर गोइंग टू द जंगल, दे फॉलो चेन्स ऑफ रिस्ट्रिक्शन अगेन हियर टेबल्स। तो उसमें बहुत सारे जो जिस दिन से प्रिपरेशन शुरू होता था उस दिन से कई सारे चीज़ों में रिस्ट्रिक्शन आना शुरू हो जाता था, जैसे कि सोशल गैदरिंग पे जाना, जैसे जिसको हम लोग एना कहते हैं, वो स्क्रीन पे दिया हुआ है। तो उन सारे जगहों पे लोग जाना बंद कर देते थे जब वो प्रिपरेशन Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
You look.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Connection is poor here.
You can continue. Yes.
Thank you. तो इसके बाद घर पे हम लोग वीविंग नहीं कर सकते हैं, एंड देन वी कैन नॉट कंज्यूम गार्लिक, मशरूम, वो सारी चीज़ें हम नहीं खा सकते हैं। इसके बाद ये पॉइंट है। एंड देन अनदर पॉइंट इज टेबूज इन मेंस्ट्रुएशन। तो मेंस्ट्रुएशन जो है, हम लड़कियों को फ्रॉम द मतलब जो पीरियड होते हैं टू द मेनोपॉज, उतना तक उस पीरियड में लोग, चाहे वो डोमेस्टिकेटेड एनिमल हो या वाइल्ड एनिमल हो, बिग जो एनिमल्स होते हैं उसे नहीं खाते हैं हमारे यहाँ में। और खास करके जब ये वाइल्ड एनिमल के केसेस में आते हैं, तो हमारे यहाँ जो विमेन जिसको पीरियड हो रहे होते हैं ना, उसको उन लोगों को कोई भी जो प्रिपरेशन जंगल पे ले जाने के लिए जितना भी प्रिपरेशन का जो सामान होते हैं उसमें टच करना, दे आर नॉट अलाउड, एंड दे कैन नॉट प्रिपेयर फूड फॉर मैन। वो नहीं करते हैं। और इसका रीज़न ये क्यों, इसलिए ये रीज़न इसलिए भी है क्योंकि वी बिलीव कि मतलब जो मंथली जो पीरियड विद डिस्चार्ज, दैट इज, वी बिलीव दैट इज इम्प्योर। और दूसरा चीज़ ये है कि जितने भी जो जंगल में जो वाइल्ड एनिमल्स जो मिलते हैं वो जंगल के हैं, जंगल की स्पिरिट के हैं। हम लोग उसे डोमेस्टिकेट नहीं करते हैं तो वो हमारे नहीं है। तो जब हम किसी और के सामान ले रहे होते हैं तो उसको उसका शेयर देना होता है, उसको रिस्पेक्ट देना होता है। और एज वेल एज कि हमारा जो मेंस्ट्रुएशन है उसको इम्प्योर माना जाता है। तो जंगल में किसी और के जो गार्डन से हम लेते हैं, किसी और के जो भी वो डोमेस्टिकेट करके रखा हुआ है, उसका वहाँ उसका जो जगह है उसको हम इम्प्योर नहीं करना चाहते हैं। तो इसलिए हम लोगों को ये जो जितने भी रिस्ट्रिक्शंस है उसको फॉलो करना पड़ता है, और वो हम लोग आज भी फॉलो करते हैं। हमारे यहाँ पे मैं खुद भी हूँ जो वाइल्ड एनिमल्स मैं नहीं खाती हूँ आज तक मैंने नहीं खाया। एंड देन Thank you. बस इतना ही है.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ijale. Sahil, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, actually describe that there are all these restrictions that people have to follow when they take away anything from the forest, because Idu believe that the forest and everything that lives in the forest belongs to the supreme spirit of the forest. And if you take something that is not yours, you have to pay a price. And the price is paid through the observation of these taboos, these restrictions, which are actually very strict. And one of the things that we have seen is that one of the separations that we've seen here is that when you're engaging in any social activity, and in a small society like the Idu, social activities are going on all the time. And it includes farming, it includes going to someone's house, it includes shamanic ceremonies. You cannot eat wild meat. And when you have hunted or eaten wild meat, you cannot engage in social activities. So this clear separation, that what it does in effect for conservation is that it really reduces very significantly the time and the opportunity for people to take away from the forest. And that is what our research has shown has allowed the conservation of these animals. So while there are no formal institutional mechanisms to enforce conservation here, it's through everyday existence. It's through observation of these cultural activities. It's through being Idu that wildlife is conserved. And that's what makes this a very different kind of a story, is because you're not doing anything separately. You're not talking about conserving. You're just living your life, and conservation is a byproduct of your life and your culture.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. But then the question that also comes to mind is that we all see that the socio-cultural practices are changing, as the world outside is changing. So how do you see these practices continuing the conservation outcomes in future, when there are no formal institutions set up and cultures may be changing?
Good evening again. So I just want to start up with just like every society, every community, every culture, which is going through transitional phase. So we also come out to get education. This is how Idus or our community came out to get educated. So in this phase, my generation, my father's generation had never been to school. We went to the school, and our kids will eventually go to the school to have modern education. What has happened is that in this transitional period, we were supposed to carry the values of our fathers to our son. But in my generation itself, we don't really know what the good values they had, and we can't inculcate and give it to the next generation. This is what we feel today. The education has done the modern education has made us more materialistic, and we have run for the cash economy all of a sudden, and there was no consumerism. These ideas were not there in my father's period. Now all of a sudden we need all those things. So due to that, our attachment, our bonding to the land, our bonding to the forest, our bonding to the mountains, into the rivers are slowly drying away. And this is the kind of education we need to feed it back to our community. And this kind of education has to be carried down. What the traditional practices were there, which eventually we are losing because of this trying to catch up the modern education. So the modern education also must imbibe these traditional practices and cultural practices which were practiced by our forefathers. So this is what I feel. Above all that, what happens with the government policies like here? The government policies is like that, they come up with 5-year plan to have so many schemes done, so many constructions to be done, but they don't come out with a plan to conserve this forest or the mountains. These are never in the thought. So every government comes and changes their extractive policies, is eventually just leading us to this stage where we are losing the forest, we are losing the animals, and all of a sudden, in the name of this development, more and more people are pushed into these areas where we were less people and there were more forest and the animal was there. As more and more people entered into this forest, eventually the animals will lose their habitat. That's what I fear like. And what's foremost for us right now is that if we look at these animals, if we have to conserve that, so can there be a way out? All those animals living here, rare animals living here, and we also exist in this ecosystem. Is it a possible way? Can there be a livelihood, honorable livelihood for us without sacrificing these animals, without destroying the habitat we have? Can there be a plan like that? Can the global community look through us like that way to help us to sustain all those animals, all those forests? I understand that in the Indian subcontinent, we cannot have an alternate landscape where we can have these animals. You have, this landscape has got all those rare animals like takin, tigers, golden cats, clouded leopards, in a small area like pandas, gibbons. So can we suggest any landscape in India? It's not possible. Since this landscape has accommodated all this, hosted all those animals, and this has been developed by continuous evolution, the long process, and a 5-year plan can't do that. So the government, whoever is coming, has to think for that. If we have to conserve this, our cultural practice also has to be accepted, that this is the way they could be conserved. So this is what I basically feel like. Can we get good education, good health, good communication without sacrificing these animals and this landscape, without destroying our ecology, without destroying our culture? Is there a way? If there is a way, what does the global community think for us? And when we look at this bleak future, that eventually all those habitats will be lost in the name of development, in the name of, new changes which we cannot accept all of a sudden. And eventually our own people also go through these changes without caring about the traditional values which we carried down from the generations. So there are so many questions, so many challenges we are facing eventually, but few like-minded, we gather here together to ask some questions like this. If there is a solution, let's work out. If it's possible, it's not possible. That's what it confuses me sometimes, to ask questions or either to solve these problems. So it's up to you, sir, or whoever is listening, that we need to think again, align ourselves in this thought. That's what I feel.
Thank you, GB. I was wondering whether these kind of discussions have also happened within the Idu Mishmi community, and some of the, if not answers, maybe some thoughts that may have come up with those discussions. Because along with the development, the government also plans to have the formal protected areas in the Dibang Valley. So government may have their own plan, but what kind of discussions have the community had about it?
See, at the community level, like there is certain platforms where they discuss about the culture, but it's about the culture. It's not about the conservation of the forest or protection of the wildlife. So discussion is mostly on the culture issues. But if it goes beyond that, we never had an occasion where we talk about conservation of the animals in that platform. But I have certain like-minded friends who we usually discuss on these issues, but it has never come to that whole community issue.
And what kind of support would help create that kind of debate, discussion that you were talking about from outside community? Yeah,
that's what I said. With all those animals surviving, the forest intact, we should have an honorable earning, livelihood. If there can be a good livelihood out of this conservation or out of protection of the animals, people should slowly change their way of thinking, so that the protection of the animal also can be a livelihood. There can be way out living. I wonder if there won't be people to see takins, there will be people, lot people to see takins. So we should be in position to expose this. The takins are here and there should be a livelihood connected to it. The way they have connected rhinos in Kaziranga, the way you have connected tigers in Kana and Bandhavgarh. We have a less population, 14,000 people. And it can be easily done if there is a good network way to do it. Like, this is what I feel.
Thank you, GB. There are a lot of questions from other people, so I will not. I will just pass on to Shruti. I was just wondering before I do that if there are any comments that you would like to, any of you would like to add to whatever has been discussed just now.
Nima, there's one thing that actually I think would like to say, and she wanted to discuss how in our minds right now, the thing that prevails, in addition to Bihar elections, is COVID. And so how COVID has impacted the life here and people's dependence on the forest and everything. Perhaps Sachli can talk about that for a second.
Yes.
So this COVID brings both negative and positive impacts in our life. तो पहले negative impacts, there is many small scale business and contracts which has been stopped. तो उसका डायरेक्ट और इनडायरेक्ट इम्पैक्ट यूथ पे काफी पड़ा हुआ है, अभी पड़ गया है. और उसके वजह से जो बहुत ही अनयूजुअल चीज यहाँ पे देखने को मिला कि that is a semi domesticated animal which we call Shah Mithun. तो वो that was only sacrificed in the ceremonial sacrifice किया जाता था, जैसे कि शादी होते हैं या फिर फ्यूनरल होते हैं एंड देन फेस्टिवल, ये सब में स्पेशली इन दिबांग वैली. तो उसको अभी जो है ऑल ऑफ सडन हम लोगों को ये देखने को मिल रहा है कि मतलब उसको कमर्शियल पर्पस पे भी सेलिंग हो रहा है, विच में इन लॉन्ग टर्म मतलब डायरेक्ट इनडायरेक्ट जो है नेचर पे भी इम्पैक्ट पड़ने वाला है. और that is negative impacts, and then some positive impacts also happening here. तो वो है इस कोविड पेंडेमिक टाइम में काफी सारे मतलब अलग अलग एज के लोग जो है ना धीरे धीरे फार्मिंग मतलब स्टार्ट कर रहे हैं, छोटे छोटे स्मॉल स्केल में ही सही, लेकिन उन लोग अभी जो काफी समय से देखने को नहीं मिल रहा था, तो अभी ऑल ऑफ सडन मतलब वो लोग शुरू कर रहे हैं, विच इज गुड. और एंड देन दूसरा ये कि हमारे यहाँ जंगलों पे ट्यूबर जो यहाँ स्क्रीन पे दिख रहा है, जिसको हम लोग लोकल उसको सोना कहते हैं, और इन साइंटिफिक टर्म्स जिसको पेरिस पॉलीफेला कहते हैं. तो इसका एक्सट्रैक्शन जो है ना काफी ह्यूज अमाउंट में होता था, जो कि पेंडेमिक टाइम में इसका जो डिमांड है वो शायद कम पड़ गया होगा, और अभी लोग इसको एक्सट्रैक्ट करने के लिए आउटसाइडर्स मतलब दे डोंट कम हियर फॉर एक्सट्रैक्टिंग दिस प्लांट. तो उसके वजह से जब इसका जो एक्सट्रैक्शन ह्यूज अमाउंट में हो रहा था, तो इस जंगल में काफी लोग वहां पे रहते थे महीनों तक. तो उससे जो है जंगल का जितने भी जो स्पीशीज है उस पे काफी नेगेटिव मतलब इम्पैक्ट पड़ रहा था. तो और उसके अलावा भी मतलब जैसे कि जंगल का जो बड़े जो कैट स्पीशीज है उसको काफी डिस्टर्बेंस होता था, एंड देन स्लोली दे कम नियर बाय द सेटलमेंट एरियाज, और सेमी डोमेस्टिकेटेड एनिमल को मतलब हार्म पहुंचाते थे. और लोगों का ये भी मानना था कि मतलब अगर कंटिन्यूसली अगर इफ इट इज हैपनिंग, तो हो सकता है कि आदमी के ऊपर भी वो अटैक करना शुरू कर दे. लेकिन अभी पेंडेमिक टाइम में लोग जब बाहर से बहुत सारा लोग नहीं आ रहे हैं, एक्सट्रैक्शन नहीं चल रहा है, तो अभी वो चीजें जो है ना देखने को नहीं मिल रहा है, अभी सुनने को नहीं मिल रहा है. तो ये पेंडेमिक का ये एक पॉजिटिव साइड हम लोग को ये देखने को मिल रहा है. हाँ, और जैसे कि अभी ये इसका जो एक्सट्रैक्शन चल रहा था, तो उसमें एक और चीज भी देखने को मिल रहा था कि जैसे हमारे यहाँ जो ईदू लोग है ना, तो वो जब हंटिंग करते हैं, तो विच आई हैव मेंशन्ड बिफोर कि वी यूज्ड टू फॉलो चेन्स ऑफ रिस्ट्रिक्शंस. लेकिन जो आउटसाइडर्स होते हैं ना, दे डोंट फॉलो दिस काइंड ऑफ टेबूज. उन लोगों की कम्युनिटी में शायद होते भी नहीं होंगे शायद. तो वो लोग यहाँ पे आते हैं तो दे डू हंट एंड दे मतलब जो भी मिलते हैं उसे मार देते हैं. तो वो भी कम हो गया है तो ये भी हम पॉजिटिव इम्पैक्ट में ही हम लोग काउंट कर रहे हैं यहाँ पे, जो कि उसका थोड़ा सा वो एक्टिविटीज वो कम ही हो गया है पहले से। थैंक यू।
Thank you, Achille. Thank you very much to add that point. I would now pass on to Shruti for the question answers that we have from all the participants.
Thank you so much. I mean, I've been hearing this since Sahil at first come to our office and shared this, and it still continues to fascinate me. And there's something new I learn every time I hear this. So there are a lot of questions. I'm going to try and bunch some of them which are together. So the first question is talking about. So the first question is: did the camera traps get any picture of any animal that local people had never seen? Also, all these different forms of golden cat, did the local people know or think it's the same species or different species?
I'll take that. Yeah, I'll take that question. Yeah, there were some there were some animals that people were not very familiar with. So not everyone goes into the forest. Women in Idu culture don't go into the forest, not into the deep forest at least. And not everyone hunts. So your knowledge of forest increases with the more time you spend in it. So there were some people who knew a lot about the forest, and there were other people who didn't know very much. So when the camera trap images started coming in, a few people had seen, for instance, most people had never seen a clouded leopard. And so that was, they knew that there are animals that lives there that has spots on its body, but they had never seen a picture. And it's a very secretive animal. And clouded leopards spend a lot of time up in the trees, so it's not very easy to see. So that animal was new for a lot of people. With the golden cats, that was really interesting. And quite confusing for me as a scientist too, because I was trying to learn and understand about wildlife through an Idu perspective. So when I initially started to interrogate about different animals that live in the forest, I got two different types of names for a type of cat from which the description was nearly the same, but the color was different. And it turns out that they were both golden cats. So there is I think the Idu way of classifying animals is based mostly on morphology, on the physical characteristics of the animal, and on some behavioral characteristics, which is different a little bit from the scientific way of classifying animals. And so for instance, the Idu would classify the golden cat with the spots on its body as a different animal than the golden cat that was the plain coated with the solid colors. But this gray, and also there was a different name for the golden cat that is completely black. It's called Amramai, and it's considered to be very dangerous. So yes, whoever has asked that question, people did think that these were different species, but people didn't think that there were 6 different species. They thought there were 2 or 3 different species, and the 6 different varieties that came out of our camera traps was actually quite surprising for a lot of local people too.
Thank you, Sahil. So the next one is, there are a lot of questions around human-wildlife conflict. So I'm going to bunch them all together and ask you all at once. The first question is, are there any incidences of tiger attacking people in the region? The second question is, so recently in the past 2 months, we find number of attacks.
Sorry, can we just take them one at a time? It gets a
Sure.
little bit confusing.
So there are 15, 17 of them. So just trying to quickly.
Okay.
But
so have there been cases of tigers attacking?
So early 90s, like around 89, 90s, there was a story like that. And one part of Dibang Valley adjacent to Siang Valley. So there was a tiger that literally killed 7 people in that village. So this story went on So eventually the tiger was killed but this conflict had been happening. And there are some stories where the tigers killed human being also. But the most of the conflict is with the local cattle life. So they start coming to the village areas, then they kill the cattle. So there the conflict occurs. So although the news stories about men being killed by tiger has not occurred so far.
Yeah, I mean in this actually
Immediately.
Nu bolna chahte kuch? Bolo.
और रिसेंटली एक जगह पे मैं वो नाम तो मेंशन नहीं करना चाहूंगी, तो एक हाई एलिवेशन पे एक लड़का को टाइगर ने अटैक किया था, जहाँ पे मेरा ये मानना है कि वहां पे जो है लोगों का एक्टिविटीज काफी बढ़ गया है, एंड मे बी बिकॉज ऑफ दैट जो वाइल्ड एनिमल्स का जो अबंडेंस है ना वो कम पड़ गया है, तो मे बी बिकॉज ऑफ दैट टाइगर जो है लोगों पे अटैक करना शुरू भी कर रहा हो। तो इन फ्यूचर में अगर हम बाकी वाइल्ड एनिमल्स को अगर खत्म हो जाता है किसी भी कारण, तो वो टाइगर जो है ह्यूमन के ऊपर अटैक नहीं करेंगे, ये तो कुछ श्योर नहीं, ये तो हो सकता है ये फ्यूचर में।
Thank you.
I just wanted to add that in the many people that we've met, like Nava said, the more recent, in the past 30 years or something, the more recent stories of tigers killing people, we've not heard. But like Achali said, that there are interactions. So for instance, in this one incident and another incident, there are a few people that were camping in the forest, and the tiger came in and then picked up a person in its sleeping bag and tried to like carry the sleeping bag and the person away with it. And when others started screaming, the tiger dropped and ran away. So there's those kinds of stories once in a while. And then obviously tigers do prey on domestic cattle, but tigers attacking people in the past 30 years fatally, there are very few stories.
So, like you mentioned, there are some incidences. So there's a question which says that there exists a religious social system for protecting these animals. How far have the indigenous practices helped these the community to survive with these wild animals?
So if we understand the question correctly, these practices have helped animals, but how have they helped people to live with animals? Is that what the question is?
Yes. How have they helped protect people to prevent or live in coexistence, I guess?
I can start and then you guys can jump in. So there are lots of rules and codes of conduct when you go into the forest. These are not official taboos. They're just practices that have been passed on from elders onto young people on how one should act when one is in the forest. For instance, the big predators are known to use mountain ridges to travel. And so when you're in the forest, you should never camp on a mountain ridge. When you're in the forest, for instance, you shouldn't make too much sound in order to attract attention. It is also believed that when you're in the forest, animals can hear you. So when you talk about animals, you don't talk about them with their actual names. You use what we call pseudonames or avoidance names to talk about animals, because it's believed that humans and animals could actually hear each other. So if you talk about them, they can hear you and they might come to you. Again, it's also believed that animals will change different produce different sounds and attract people. So if you hear all these sounds in the forest, you're not supposed to react to them and not imitate the sounds. So in some cultures, for instance, you call animals out, you can attract them, and then you can hunt them. That doesn't happen in Idu culture. You don't imitate animal sounds to attract them or to do anything to them. There's also, again, within this code of conduct, elders used to say that if an Idu man wants to live a safe and healthy life, he needs to be very careful about how much hunting he does. So you don't hunt too much. Because if you're hunting too much, you have to be in taboo for a lot. And if you're in a taboo a lot, then the probability of you faltering and violating a taboo also increases. And if you violate a taboo, then the spirits will get really mad and they might punish you. So you have to hunt in moderation. Don't take more than you need. And always when you hunt, share the meat with all of your kin, all of the village people. So there's all these good practices that
there is no, earlier there was no selling of any wild meat. So only sharing. No.
Yeah, like Nava is saying that earlier there was no one would sell wild meat to anyone. Because also it was believed that you shouldn't give this meat, which is the precious commodity of the forest, to anyone who does not follow the same restrictions as you do. And so there was no sale or anything, but it is beginning in small portions now. So I think this is what, anything else you guys want to add?
So there's one which talks about how in the last couple of months you find a number of attacks on people increasing, particularly on women going for fodder near villages in Uttarakhand, lower Himalayas, as footfall and presence of human decreased during lockdown in these village common areas. What advice would you wish to offer to communities and to government to deal with this issue?
I think this question is beyond our pay grade.
Yeah. We can't provide any solution for that because
for Uttarakhand, yeah, we don't know the situation. I mean, the idea of a CCA or of idea of localized relations with animals are that they are localized. Everyone's experience is very local and unique to them. So just as people from Uttarakhand can and shouldn't tell Idu people how to live with tigers, I don't think we can tell them how they should live with tigers or other animals either.
So the next one is talking about the ownership. They're trying to find out some of the governance aspects of the landscape in which such a diversity of flora and fauna exist. Who governs these? What are the customary institutions? Does the Dibang Valley fall outside of the wildlife sanctuary? And what is the relationship between wildlife sanctuary authorities and the indigenous people in the valley?
So I'll take a few of those and then I will call out. So the first part of who governs. So traditionally, like Nava said in the introduction, that no part of the Dibang Valley is unpeopled. Every part of the Dibang Valley has it's a cultural landscape, and there are people everywhere in every valley, and the land belongs to the different villages have exclusive boundaries of the forest that belongs to them, and only the people of that village use and access those areas. So as even the neighboring villagers can't just go in and do anything in that area. They have to seek the permission of the owners, village owners of that land. So what that does is that creates a system of ownership of land in which only its rightful, customary, cultural owners are able to access resources on that land. That's the sort of the widest, the most general way of describing that. So that's a customary institution. This is again a part of the culture and a part of understanding. It's not codified. It's not written down anywhere. There are no scriptures or anything or black letter law that says that. Everyone knows it. For instance, Nava knows where his forest is. Achili knows where her forest is. They don't, right? Everyone knows these boundaries. The other thing, does Dibang Valley fall out of wildlife sanctuary? No. The wildlife sanctuary is within Dibang Valley. And also the other wildlife, there are two wildlife sanctuaries. There's one in the north, which is Dibang Wildlife Sanctuary, which Nava said is India's largest wildlife sanctuary. It's 4,129 square kilometers. It is on what is and was traditional Idu land. It was community land. It still belongs to many different clans. And the wildlife sanctuary, by all means and purposes, was declared without the consent of the clan members, and for the most part, without their information. In the south, close to Nava's ancestral village, so the north is close to Achili's ancestral village. In the south, close to Nava's ancestral village, is another wildlife sanctuary called Mehal Wildlife Sanctuary, which is 260 some square kilometer. And that also was community land before. So these are all within Idu area, which is collectively called Dibang Valley. What is the relationship between wildlife sanctuary authorities and the indigenous people in the valley? That you guys talk. You are the people. मतलब क्या वाइल्ड लाइफ अथॉरिटीज जो हैं, फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट और लोगों के बीच में क्या रिलेशनशिप है?
So wildlife authority is more like a new entity, like so even if the wildlife authority is there, a wildlife division is there, there's no participation from the wildlife authority like with the community. There is no like relationship like that established. So if the clan owns certain areas which is within the sanctuary itself or within the not within the sanctuary, also the clan area, the clan from that people from that clan will go to their areas for hunting or collecting soil resources. So far there is not much of restriction from the wildlife authorities also. And eventually the wildlife authorities, they themselves don't go there. There are very few, like one DFO is there, one forester is there, two clerks, 2-3 clerks are there, and one ranger is there. They don't go to the forest at all. If you ask anything about the forest, they have no much knowledge. Rather, if you ask the village elders, they know where the streams are, where the animals feed, where the salt lake is there. It will be the villagers who have more knowledge than the wildlife authorities. This is what this is like the presently.
ये भी बताओ कि Nijhawan में से तो summer
वो
common बंदे hunting करते हैं, लेकिन आप लोग का
well, I let me tell you an instance, like in Mehal Wildlife Sanctuary, at one time it was in a lower altitude, so there are a lot of chambers. So early like 80s, 70s, there's a big lake in the middle of that sanctuary, and that's called Mehal Lake. So at one time it used to be infested with sambars, deers, everything. But all of a sudden people from the plain area started accessing this forest, and there is no sambars left in those. But instantly with my own village people, I have managed to conserve some 15 sambars, which I want to count this time. So in my own native village, old village, and there are still some deers, bears, clouded leopards, which we have seen through some camera traps. So this is how we are trying to put the things in order by ourselves. Like, so there is not much any support from any sanctuary or any wildlife division.
Actually, को भी कुछ बोलना है इस टॉपिक के बारे में?
Yeah, you can.
So, and I think entire my life I've never heard or seen the kind of जो forest department होता है ना, मैंने कभी नहीं सुना. All of a sudden जब the year of 2013 I guess, जो टाइगर कफ है ना, वो दिबांग वैली के एक अंग्रिम वैली विलेज में रेस्क्यू किया गया है. उसके बाद जाके लोगों में काफी बातें चलने लगी कि फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट ये कर रहा है, फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट वो कर रहा है. उससे पहले तो हम लोग ने कभी नहीं सुना कि फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट दिबांग वैली में एग्जिस्ट भी करता है. इसके बाद मुझे इतना पता है कि हमारे यहाँ में जितना भी जो स्पीशीज है, जो एंडेंजर्ड स्पीशीज है, वो सारे चीजें अभी भी प्रिजर्व है. So that is not because of any authority or system, something like this. That is preserved because of our culture. क्योंकि हमने पहले ही बताया कि हम लोग कल्चर को ऐसे किसी को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए हम उसको बाय फोर्स उसको फॉलो कर रहे, ऐसे नहीं है. वो सारी चीजें हम लोगों को इसलिए करना पड़ता है, हमें यही सिखाया गया है कि it's a way of our life. हाँ, way of life. तो अगर मैं ये नहीं करती हूँ तो मेरे ऊपर में सारा, जैसे इहो ने पहले बताया कि बहुत बड़ा कर्ज लगता है, तो वो कितने भी जनरेशन तक चले जाओ वो कर्ज कभी खत्म नहीं होगा. अननेचुरल डेथ होता है, ये हो, बहुत सारा चीजें हमें सिखाया गया है, बताया गया है. तो हम लोग वो सारे चीजों को डे टू डे लाइफ में हम लोग जीते हैं, और बिकॉज ऑफ दैट एवरीथिंग इज मतलब स्टिल प्रिजर्व्ड. तो कोई सिस्टम तो आज तक हमने नहीं देखा. थैंक यू.
Thank you. There's a added question to that, which is, what is the percentage of non-Idus consuming wild animals in Dibang?
I'll take that with, and you guys have to add something. So in the areas where we have some sort of an understanding of these figures of consumption, there are not a lot of non-Idus right now. There weren't a lot of non-Idus when we did our research. Like actually said that in the past few years to collect this tuber, जो locally इसका नाम सोना है, And उसको collect करने के लिए बहुत ढेर सारा आदमी बाहर से आ गया. And so, but before that, there were not a lot of outsiders. But the outsiders that were here were high-ranking officers, and they habitually would pay local young people and buy animals from them. And their consumption was actually quite high. And also these high-ranking officers are in positions of power. They're the ones that sign off on contracts. They're the ones that give petty jobs to people. So as a local person who's looking for employment, you want to keep them happy. And one of the ways to keep them happy is to provide a constant supply of wild animals. Kuch aap add karna hai?
So the next question is, can you talk a bit about how indigenous conservation practices in this context have been impacted by outside influences?
I think Nava spoke about that in great detail. Do you want to say something else?
A little bit, put some light here.
My agenda.
So what I was saying that in this transitional period, no, people are changing their fate also. Like, so indigenous people slowly going away to other religion, established religions, like I don't want to mention it. So what happens is that whatever the taboos, whatever the observation we used to do, eventually they will leave everything there. And they will just start hunting indiscriminately without following any of this rule, because it's not mentioned in any of their established religions. So this is really impacting, I feel like. Young guys who have converted to some other religion, they go to the forest and hunt discriminately. And they are also the guys who start selling also eventually. And this is creating some kind of market, like, so which is really bad for the forest, bad for the community itself. So that's what I feel. This is time slowly this is changing like that.
Thank you. So the next question is, does Idu cultural practices treat different elevations and or habitats separate in their taboos and other practices?
Well, there's certain observations. Basically, if you are going to the higher altitude, no, those are hunting. It's done for mostly hunting. Whatever we did, resources we collected, where in the higher altitude, we are either masked deer or like at one time it was Mishmitakin. It's a medicinal plant. So that used to be collected and sold. Like, and there used to be certain rules for that also. When you go to the higher altitude, we always say that we divide the spiritual force which is guiding them or guarding the animals. So the higher elevation, we have the spirit called the Gono that guards all the animal, forest, wildlife. So we pay obedience to that at the higher elevation, and we have to follow that strict. And at the lower elevation, we have another like Asa, which is at the lower elevation, which protect the forest, which has the ownership of the animals, spiritual ownership that we call it. So that also we follow that. This is how the elevation wise we follow. So this is in every, like any Idu hunter would follow, like usually that way.
Basically, it depends on who the owner of the forest is. The higher mountains are owned by the spirit called Golon, like Nava said, and Golon has very strict rules, and it's also a spirit that can be easily angered. So you have to be very careful. You don't make loud sounds. You know, you even select firewood carefully so that it doesn't crack and produce sound. You don't curse people. You don't say badly about people. You always share everything. You go there with a pure heart. Actually, there was this one time when the three of us, Iho, Nava, and I went to the high elevation lakes. And Iho and I, you know, we were young and vibrant and didn't know any of these rules. And we were hiking up to the lake and we saw this lake, and it was so beautiful that we started in glee and in happiness, we started yelling. And at that time, the sky was completely bright blue open. Within a couple of minutes, the clouds came in, and then it snowed and rained, and it snowed to such a point that we, you know, when we opened our tents in the morning, we couldn't open them. It had snowed so heavily. And everyone in the village was saying that we had angered Golo by loudly speaking. And that's why it had happened.
Thank you. So I think there are a lot of questions about people wanting to know, is there any movement against the Dibang multipurpose dam, and is the Idu community opposing it? And how it has impacted the community?
Well, I was one of those activists doing. I must admit that I was one of those pioneers who started this movement. Eventually, we just left this movement because there was too much of conflict. Eventually, like it came to the point where some shooting happened in the town itself. So at one time there was a big movement, but now it has fallen off. Like now the more movement is about the compensation, the cash money. No one wants to be obstructed for getting that cash money. So the mentality is all of a sudden changed. No, that's what I said. Like in few years, we are comfortable selling our own land. It wasn't there some years before. This is the kind of education, consumerism, materialism, which our education brought in us. Like so, right now there is no such movement. But we do share sometimes that these projects are not good for the community directly. It only will benefit the outsiders, where our participation is not even 5%. So, and people try to convince this is a development activity, but the development activity can be calculated as development when we are participating, and the community itself is not owning or not participating at 5%, you don't call that as development. That is more an exploitation. So this is what I teach to the youngers, but there are not many people who listen today. That is the truth.
So, GBG, as a part of that, you spoke about the ills of modern education. So there was a question there. It says that, in your opinion, what changes in the formal system would help children link to cultural changes that are changing? Would programs outside the formal system help children more to connect to their culture? In some areas, in Adivasi areas, groups organize walk with elders, interactions with elders to keep alive traditional knowledge of the forest. Would something informal work better in your area? Or are there such avenues already?
Well, there is no such avenues right now. What I think is that just to get back to what you said, so our elders need to have time just to guide our younger people, our younger generation. So again, the younger generations also should have that curiosity and eagerness to understand that, which I think this is not developing. That eagerness and curiosity is not developing. So slowly there has to be some force, some way out to develop that relationship with nature. And this can be only initiated by the elders first. So that's what I feel like.
So, thank you.
Actually,
Yes.
we wanted to add something.
Yeah.
तो ये चीज को कंटिन्यू रखने के लिए नाउ वी आर वर्किंग ऑन स्टोरी टेलिंग टू द चिल्ड्रन इन डिफरेंट स्कूल्स. तो जैसे हमारे जो फोक टेल्स होते हैं, स्टोरी में काफी चीजें कवर होता है. तो अगर हमको अपना कल्चर को प्रिजर्व करना है, कंटिन्यू बेस पे रखना है, तो वी हैव टू पास इट ऑन टू द यंगर जनरेशन. सो वी आर वर्किंग ऑन दैट. और बहुत जल्द ही मतलब हम लोग उसको मतलब अलग अलग स्कूल्स में डिलीवर करेंगे. तो अभी प्लानिंग मतलब चल रहा है. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, I think it's already 6:30. Maybe we take a couple of questions, maybe 3 more questions, and Sahil, if with your permission, I can share your email ID and people can write to you and continue the correspondence if people have questions. Is that fine?
Sure, just that I have very limited email access, but please email. I will respond when I have email access.
So one question is, with changing demographic, how do you intend to ensure that Idu cultural conservation practices will be honored by others? Since we have heard outsiders are not necessarily respecting these, what efforts should be made to institutionalize these conservation practices beyond just the Idu culture? Can you share any current initiatives?
मतलब कि जैसे डेमोग्राफिक चेंजेस होंगे यहाँ पे, तो अभी से दिख रहा है कि बाहर से जो आ रहे हैं वो लोग तो ये सब चीज़ें नहीं फॉलो कर रहे हैं, तो फ्यूचर में जो बाहर से लोग आएगा तो क्या करने से ठीक होगा, या अभी आप लोग कुछ कर रहे हैं यहाँ में जिससे कि प्रिवेंट कर सकता है जो
So with the changing time, जो demographic pattern है हमारा ये टाउन का ही बदल चुका है. So far there is no such movement or no initiative to tell them that culturally how we have been conserving to the outsiders. So ये तो as soon as start you entering the rural areas, the village areas, that's where they have to at least put stop for this kind of all of a sudden demographic change नहीं आना है, और अगर बाहर से कोई आता भी है इनको समझाना है. We have to teach them this is the practice and you also have to follow that. If you want to live with us and you have to observe these taboos or observe this whatever respect you have for us, then only we could allow that. But there is no such formalization now. But what I feel is that it could be done that way. Could be somehow we can moderate that. We can just have a system mechanism to do that also probably. But that requires a lot of like-minded gathering and discussing like how it can be done. So this is what I feel.
Thank you. There's does anyone else want to add to that?
No, just that what Achali said earlier about the storytelling workshops that are being planned right now. Hopefully, because in schools here, there's obviously Idu students, but also children of the outsiders that are living here. So hopefully that will be an initiative through which outsiders will come to know about Idu cultural heritage and Idu stories, and that might be a starting point for something. But a lot of the changes are too overwhelming, and they are made at a level that are beyond the grasp of folks, and so a lot of the times decisions are made and they're pronounced, but this is the storytelling initiative people can start talking and listening again to these stories that contain incredibly valuable traditional knowledge on how to be a Idu person, how to live around animals, how animals live with each other, and so on and so forth.
So there's one question on someone asking what is the concept of misu, and which is a taboo, and why are I'm sorry if I said it correctly or not. And
no, that's fine. Sorry.
And why are only certain animals considered mihu?
Misu.
Yes.
Well, I don't really know the exact explanation for why some animals were considered as misu, but when you see scientifically, like in our community, in our culture, the most of those animals which are rare, maybe like gibbons, they were called misus because they were limited in numbers. Even tigers, they are called misus, and any rarer animal, they are all considered as misu. And what we say, if you disturb any misu, it can create lot of curses in your family, in your generation. So you're not supposed to, it's an omen that you are not supposed to disturb them at all, kill them, hunt them. So this is how the misus are separated from normal animals. Like if you have a deer, that's not called misu. It's a deer, not a misu. But any cat family or a gibbon, some of the smaller animals are also called misus, which are some varieties. Owls and some kind of red varieties are also mongoose. These are called misus. So which generally we don't kill, we don't hunt them. So this is how it's separated from misu and non-misu animals.
I'll just add to that so there's the misu, but also there is a belief that there are certain individual animals, and they could be from any species, that the spirit of the mountain really likes, and he keeps those animals for himself. But to a common person, that is not visible. All deer will look the same to a Idu person. But some of those deer, some of those individuals could be the really dear to the spirit, and those are also called misu. And if you accidentally kill them sometimes, and that can also bring a lot of danger, which links back to the idea that a hunter should always hunt within reason and shouldn't just keep killing animals, because some animals within the non-misu category can also have some internal deformities or some type of things that makes them misu as well.
So this is a question for both GB and Ihu, which is, what are the ecotourism prospects in the Dibang Valley?
यहाँ पे बहुत सारा पॉसिबिलिटीज है, जैसे कि यहाँ पे बहुत सारा नेचुरल रिसोर्सेस है यहाँ पे जो हमारा कल्चर ने प्रोटेक्ट करके रखा है, उसको हम लोग यूज कर सकते हैं। जैसे पहले साहिल ने बताया था कि जो जैसे शायद नावत जीबी ने बताया था कि आप आकिन को दिखा के आप पैसा उससे जो जनरेट करना चाहिए, उसी तरह का हम लोग यहाँ पे ट्राई कर रहे हैं कि जैसे कुछ जानवर हो गया उसको दिखा करके जो हमारा अपना लोकल हंटर है उसको यूज कर सके। यहाँ पे बहुत सारा हंटर है जो जिसको ये जंगल के बारे में बहुत सारा नॉलेज है, जो हमारा फ्यूचर जो जंगल गाइड बन सकता है। उसको पता है कि कौन सा जगह में, जैसे कौन सा माउंटेन में आपको कौन सा जानवर मिलेगा, कौन सा जगह में कौन सा बर्ड मिलेगा, आपको ताकिन कौन सा जगह में कब मिलेगा। इस तरह का नॉलेज जो है यहाँ पे जितना भी हमारा लोकल हंटर्स है उनको नॉलेज है इसके बारे में। तो हम लोग अभी ट्राई कर रहे हैं कि जितना भी हंटर्स है उनको जो ये टूरिस्ट गाइड में कन्वर्ट करे। तो और यहाँ पे जैसे यहाँ पे बहुत सारा नदी है, आपने चित्तौड़गढ़ ने तो देखा है यहाँ पे कितना सारा रिवर स्ट्रीम वगैरह है रिवर बहुत बड़ा रिवर्स है। तो यहाँ पे अभी हमने यहाँ पे जितना भी यहाँ पे बहुत सारा लोकल यूथ है जो अनएम्प्लॉयड है, तो इन सबको हम लोग अभी ट्राई कर रहे हैं कि किसी तरह से इको टूरिज्म में इन सबको ट्रेन करें। तो अभी रिसेंटली हमने यहाँ पे टीम खोला है जो दिबांग एडवेंचर, वहाँ पे हमने 6-7 लोगों को जो अनएम्प्लॉय यूथ है जो उनको हमने ट्रेन किया है। और यहाँ पे राफ्टिंग का जो राफ्टिंग कराते हैं और फिर कैंपिंग कराते हैं, उसके बाद जिसको हम बर्डिंग और ट्रैकिंग उन सब पे एंगेज कर रहे हैं। तो इसी तरह से हम लोग जितना भी लोकल यहाँ पे अनएम्प्लॉय यूथ है उनको ट्राई कर रहे हैं कि इसका ये इको टूरिज्म में ज्यादा आ जाए, ताकि हमारा जो नेचर है उसको भी सेफ रख सकते फ्यूचर में, और नेचर से हम लोग कुछ ले सके, उससे नेचर से जो फायदा हमें मिले।
Just want to add that Iho is being very modest. He actually does amazing rafting expeditions and mountain biking and all kinds of nature adventure tourism here based on nature. And the team of the young that Iho leads they're an excellent team. So do come and visit. And the photographs that you saw in our presentation, Iho's team can take you to those places and you can see them with your own eyes. These are stunning landscapes that are we don't think are found anywhere else.
So quickly, so one is how do state and national laws recognize cultural laws and taboos? And does Dibang fall under the autonomous district of 6th scheduled area?
I'll start. No, I don't, to my knowledge, and I think Nima can respond to that I don't think our national laws recognize cultural institutions of forest governance. They, in the form that they exist currently. There's the National Forest Law, there's the Wildlife Protection Act, and they're all based in law enforcement and other legal mechanisms. There are in different places in India, there are different ways in which local people do use culture and other mechanisms, local institutions to govern forests. We heard in one of the webinars about Van Panchayats in Uttarakhand. Nagaland has village councils, and they have some degree of governance rights over forests. Dibang Valley is not in 6th schedule. All of Arunachal is not in 6th schedule. There is Panchayati Raj here, but there is no explicit recognition of governance of forest and wildlife through cultural mechanisms. There is no such thing in Arunachal. Did I say that correctly? Yeah. And maybe Nima, because I'm not familiar with all of the forest laws, Nima can add.
No, you're right. I'm not so familiar with Arunachal's specific laws, but in the national context, you're absolutely right. I did, though, think that customary systems are accepted in Arunachal.
Well, they're accepted until they're not, and so yeah, you can, like, the village boundaries and everything are Navabud.
See, they are accepted within the jurisdiction of the village. Once you start going to litigation, going to the court, and it doesn't validate, like. So this is where the limitations are there.
So with respect to tigers, what led to the decline of tigers from the 1970s to now? And when were the sharpest decline?
So when we're talking, just to clarify before I hand it over to Nava, when we're talking about decline in tigers, we're talking about decline in tigers in the plains. The tigers still live in the mountains, and they live, we don't have historical baselines to compare the population sizes with, so we don't know whether tiger numbers historically have increased in the mountains or decreased. So the decrease in the tigers, we're talking about only in the plains around the town of Rowing and some of the foothills. But what led to that, I'll let Nava speak.
So we exactly doesn't know what the exact figures of the tigers which are in Dibang Valley and Lower Dibang Valley. No one has counted that. No department, no people have not counted it.
We actually do.
So, well, we have an average knowledge that this number could be existing. That's all. We have not practically counted ourselves how much, and the decline could be. What I'm talking is like the foothill areas which were exposed to the plains. Most people access that. That's where most of the prey has gone out. There is no prey base, so eventually there's no tigers in this area. In the plain areas, there used to be big forests. There used to be a lot of water sources, which is all dried up. When you see that when the farming has happened in such large scale, those are the areas where there used to be a lot of sambar, a lot of deers. When they are no more there, so the tigers no there. This is how I'm talking about declining in this phase.
But you still, I just want to add, you still do get once in a while news of tigers coming down, and then someone losing their mithun to a tiger. That's how you know there's a tiger. You see a dead animal, and so that does happen. But like Nava said, and it is actually in some of the foothills, pug marks you see also. But in some of the foothills, there were tigers up until even 5-6 years ago.
10 years.
10 years ago. It's been very recent since there's been a huge push of land clearing and roads and highways and lots of folks coming in. But one of the things that we wanted to link it to in the past, that Nava mentioned about his own community forest that has sambar. What has happened is from Mehal Wildlife Sanctuary over the years, sambar have entirely disappeared, and so have many other animals. And that is because now that the community has transferred the jurisdiction and the governance of the land from the clans to the forest department, it has sort of become an open season for all. The forest department isn't, to be honest, very effective in keeping people out. And so you see, at least in the sanctuary area, people from outside come, they hunt, it's because of the loss of traditional rights over land.
Yeah.
And right next to Mehal Wildlife Sanctuary is where Nava's forest is, ancestral forest is, and that still has sambar.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'm going to ask a last question. I'm been toggling between Zoom and the YouTube questions, and the questions are going to go on, and it's really late. And thank you so much for giving us your time. But and thanks, we will like to thank all the attendees who've been sitting and listening in. So the last question I want to ask is, what's next? What do you intend to? What are your plans for the future?
See, it's very hard to put in some 2 sentences. What are the plans? Like what I said, that we face so much of challenges, so many questions, and we don't really have a solution. I think all the listeners later can provide us solutions, how to do it, how to conserve and protect this forest. So what I said at the first is that if this forest being protected and the animal being conserved or protected can create an honorable livelihood for everybody and every community, like Mishmi community, Idu community, and eventually that will help us to understand that. So an honorable livelihood for everybody, and that can be related to ecotourism, wildlife tourism slowly. This is how the approach could be. What I feel is like, this is the correct way to go for it, rather than all of a sudden extracting the resources or taking out the water potentiality, measuring that. So the water potentiality is there because of the forest. The forest is there because of the animal. So if you can't protect that element first, why you look into the water potentiality first? Our first element is the forest. That has to be protected first. The first element is the animal, which create forest here, which regenerate forest here. So that should be the outlook. And trying to protect that animal and the forest, we should be having a honorable earning, a livelihood for every one of us, so that we don't have to depend on destroying the forest. This is what I feel. This could be a way to make changes. And if the people can help us to do that in a better way, we welcome these opinions. We welcome this suggestion, maybe even physical contributions, whatever the mental contribution, that will help us to solve some issues. Thank you.
But there,
Yeah. Any questions?
Actually wanted to add something to it in the realm of the cultural part.
तो कल्चर को उसको कंटिन्यू रखने के लिए हम लोग को जैसे हम लोग एक और चीज शुरू करने जा रहे हैं, दैट इज ईगो इंस्टीट्यूशन, शैमन, ईगो ईगो मतलब शैमन. तो हमारे यहाँ पे जो मतलब ईगो ऐसा चीज है जो सबको ऑलमोस्ट सबको हाँ कनेक्ट करता है. हाँ, इसका बाद अगर हम इसको प्रिजर्व करता है तो डायरेक्ट इनडायरेक्ट सब चीज प्रिजर्व रहेगा, प्रोटेक्ट रहेगा. तो इसके लिए अगर वंस ईगो डिसअपियर, दैट मीन्स वी मे लॉस एवरीथिंग लाइक आवर कल्चर, आइडेंटिटी. तो जो बाकी लोगों को हम लोग सिर्फ यही बताने के लिए कोशिश कर रहा है कि हमारा मतलब आइडेंटिटी, टू प्रिजर्व आइडेंटिटी मतलब वो कितना इम्पोर्टेंट है. तो इफ वी वांट टू प्रिजर्व आइडेंटिटी, देन वी हैव टू प्रिजर्व ईगो शैमन. और इसको कैसे बचाया जाए, तो इसको बचाने के लिए हमारे पास एक ही अभी रास्ता है, दैट इज इसको एक इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइज कर दे. उसके लिए हम लोगों ने इस पे भी काम करना शुरू कर दिया कि ईगो गाइड जो कि हमारे यहाँ कम अभी धीरे धीरे कम होते जा रहे हैं, तो उसमें से जो ईगो गाइड है वो सिलेक्ट करेंगे एंड देन स्टूडेंट्स, जो लोग स्टूडेंट को मतलब वो टीचिंग्स देंगे सारा. तो इस तरीके से हम लोग जो इस चीज को कंटिन्यू करने के लिए कोशिश कर रहे हैं. तो इनिशियल है, लेटर स्टेज में देखा जाएगा कि इससे आगे और हम क्या कर सकते हैं. पर शुरू में बहुत बड़ा चीज हम लोगों को नहीं करना है, बीट बाय बीट मतलब जैसे भी छोटे छोटे चीजों से हम पे काम करना शुरू करेंगे एंड देन लेटर स्टेज में हम लोग होपफुली ये बड़ा चीज में कन्वर्ट होगा, सक्सेस होगा. थैंक यू.
No, I just wanted to add to what actually said, that the role of the shaman is actually incredibly important in the Idu community. And as it is in all traditional animistic communities, there's the Idu culture is an oral tradition. There are no books. There's no script for the Idu language. They don't have a Bhagavad Gita or a Bible. And so the Igu, the traditional knowledge rests in the Igu. There are libraries, living libraries of knowledge on how people should live with people, knowledge on how people should live with animals, on how to send the diseased and the departed to the other world, how to protect people. All of this knowledge rests in the shaman. And shamans are disappearing. Most shamans in the Idu community are older, new people. Youngsters are not taking up shamanism, and they're not taking up shamanism because of the very important economic and social changes that have occurred. Now, as children, as soon as they're 4 years old, they're shipped off to boarding schools. When you spend your whole life in a boarding school, you don't get to learn your culture. And then you come back and then you don't know your culture. Also, when you come back, you have to immediately get employed in wage income. So what the people here are trying to do, a small group of people, is to provide help, stipendary help to youngsters who are willing to learn shamanism, so to support their families while they learn how to become shamans. And that crucial support for a number of years can allow them to pursue shamanic learning, and hopefully they can become the next generation of shamans. So we're thinking about this apprenticeship program right now. It's in early stages of discussion, but that's sort of the nuts and bolts of it.
Thank you so much. That was a very, very, very interesting, fascinating talk. And hopefully in the future, we'll get to hear more of it physically, and we get to come to Arunachal and listen to actually NEO and GBG, and have more questions. I really apologize for a few people who have asked, and we were unable to take their questions due to the time constraint. But hopefully the conversation shouldn't end here, and it continues, and we hear more and more stories coming from the valley, as we can clearly see there's so many plans in the future. So thank you so much. And really, really thank you for your makeshift and being able to, make it here and share your